Welcome to TSAM, and in particular this webinar or this session, it's called Communication Surveillance in the Digital Age, Adopting an AI or Artificial Strategy for the Future. By way of introduction, all communication is now electronic, be that email, messaging, voice, and there's multiple messages for that. And unfortunately, for various legal reasons and regulatory reasons, there is the need to monitor or survey, look over these communications. For example, you want to keep a record of an activity, market abuse, criminal activity, and even firms still use recordings for training and staff feedback sessions. One of the challenges on this is there is an absolute massive amount of data to monitor. I wouldn't even like to guess how much data there is at the moment, which is impossible using manual techniques or your traditional analysis tools to try and assess. Therefore, AI techniques and technologies are coming to their own into this area to be very, very beneficial. We're very lucky to be joined by an expert in this field, Domash, who's a general manager at Relativity Trace. So therefore, before we dive into the guts of the meeting, I don't know if Jordan, you'd like to introduce yourself and your background to this topic?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jordan Domash. I lead Relativity Trace. Relativity Trace is an AI-powered communication surveillance tool built by Relativity. If you're not familiar with Relativity, we've been around for a long time. We actually started out in investigations and e-discovery. So we've got a wide portfolio of legal and compliance tools, and I lead the communication surveillance business.
Okay. I suppose the very open question to get the discussion flowing is, what actually is communication surveillance in the digital age? Unfortunately, these phrases, digital and surveillance, are often deliberately and sometimes accidentally misused. So I'd be interested to get from your vast experience of those, what you think communication surveillance actually is,
Yeah, communication surveillance is the monitoring of communications to detect specific regulatory risks. When we say communications, it can mean really any form of digital channel where employees are communicating with each other or with customers. So it could be email, it could be chat, like your financial chat platforms like Bloomberg or IceChat. It could be enterprise chat systems like Slack or Teams. It could be video collaboration tools like Zoom or WebEx. It could be social media platforms. And so today's day and age, there's a wide variety of ways that your employees talk to your customers or internally. And communication surveillance is ensuring that in those various channels, nothing bad is occurring. No one is violating any regulatory requirements or regulatory norms. And it's a field that has grown fairly significantly over the last few years as regulatory requirements have increased.
That's interesting. And what sort of AI tools are actually available to help with this? Because I've studied AI from an academia point of view many times over the last couple of years, and AI is such a wide topic, and it can cover anything from sort of like big data, machine learning, Internet of everything, Internet of Things. So what sort of tools are actually very, very are the most useful ones? It'd be very interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks in the industry treat AI as this like magic button. You press the magic button and boom, you get
ultimate
alerts
silver bullet.
Exactly, and that's it's a little bit of a simplification.
Yeah.
We've come a long way, since communication surveillance as a field really came to be 10 years ago. And when the field first started, it was very heavy on lexicons, right? Search terms, phrases for you to write in advance. This is the exact text that I'm looking for. Today, there's a lot of AI capabilities out there, and we make the joke about the magic button, the silver bullet, because there's a ton of different tools that each are applicable at different phases in the communication surveillance process. So broadly, we group these AI capabilities into three buckets at the highest level. Bucket A is technology to reduce obvious junk. So your team is sending 100 emails a day per person. 50 to 100 emails per day per person is kind of what we see. And many of them are in the same thread. So if I email you saying something, Paul, you forward it to someone else, you now have two emails that have the same basic text. And so there's AI technology that allows you to identify that as duplicative content So if there is an alert, you only alert on it once. That's called email threading. There's duplication technology, there's language identification technology. So basically a whole set of tools that remove obvious junk. But we're not even getting into the identifying of risk, but just to remove obvious junk. The second bucket is what we call it's risk identifying. And so many vendors have models out there, machine learning based models that generate a risk score if a particular communication triggers a particular risk. So if it looks like bribery, if it looks like collusion, if it looks like sharing of inside information or rumors and speculation. And so now we're in the world of models built to actually detect specific risks. And then the third bucket of technology helps connect the dots. So let's say an alert is triggered. It's your risk scoring model scores something as a 95%. It's really likely that this is collusive behavior. Well, then how do you unravel that thread? How do you go from that one alert to 10 other communications that provide the context to that story? And so there's a set of technologies out there that can group similar conversations together to really kickstart a potential investigation. And so there's a lot of different technologies that you can use at each of those phases.
Yeah, very interesting. I like the one you mentioned about obviously the I think you said the bucket A. I think you called it technology obvious. Getting rid of the emails, forwardings and replies, and the horrible reply all that drags everybody up down, annoys everybody. But I'm particularly interested in the second item you mentioned about having like doing something like a risk model to give some sort of like risk rating. But how are those models actually developed? I mean, are they sort of based on machine learning? Are they based on observations? I mean, just be fascinated how those models are actually developed and created and also maintained. No doubt this is a moving feast, isn't it? So
yeah. So there's lots of different technologies that you can use. There's natural language processing, there's machine learning. Really, when at the core you have a model that identifies a specific risk score, and typically the way that they're generated is large amounts of training data. So examples of specific behaviors that exemplifies what this particular risk looks like. And so we've got a team of people that are scouring through enforcement cases, regulatory publications, past examples of misbehavior, and identifying here's examples of what this specific content looks like. Many tools, many platforms also give the ability for your reviewer team to refine them automatically. So let's say you get 10 alerts every day for collusive behavior. Well, you're going to look at those 10 alerts and you're going to say, this is relevant, I'm going to escalate it, or this is a false positive. And all of that data is awesome data at continuing to tune the model specifically for your organization. So if you get 10 alerts and one of them is actually that specific behavior and 9 of them aren't, well, then the model is going to get better in the future at finding things that look like the alerts that you've seen in the past. And more importantly, reduce the obvious false positives. So you stop seeing things that clearly aren't collusive behavior. So it's a combination of, pre-training up front by the platform developer combined with, in your day-to-day workflow, constant tuning and training.
Yeah, interested in the train and test model. That's quite good. So you just to understand the point is you'll take say 100 items a day to make the sums easier. You would use say 40% to train the model or develop the model, and then you would test it against the other 60% or vice versa, and then run that in the real world. You come out with for example, Jordan and Paul seem to be on the fraud. When you assess, it comes out the model. When you assess their model, you think, actually, they're not on the fraud. They're just trying to organise a surprise party for the head of TSAM, and then you just obviously tweak the model to cover that scenario. So it's an ongoing beast, really, isn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you go back to when this type of technology was formed, you need an army of data scientists. You need a team of people tuning and training the models. And the technology has come so far that today it trains itself, it tunes itself. It's driven by your own workflow. And so you're exactly right. There's a lot of the model is generating alerts. You're reviewing it, tuning it naturally. There's also a set of workflows to really test and refine the model. purposely. So how do you validate that a model is statistically accurate? And so there's workflows built into these technologies to do that with as little work as possible, and bring it into your day-to-day workflow as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, also coming back to your third point, which again I found fascinating, was I think to quote you, I wrote it down, was a connect the dots, which I think is a fantastic metaphor. How do you sort of, like, for example, if somebody is doing some sort of fraud or some criminal behaviour, they're unlikely to make it easy to be found, so they may be using a combination of Bloomberg chat, mobile phones, email, even social media. I mean, the list is endless. What sort of techniques do you do to try and bring all these elements of a potential fraud together to suddenly get a red light flashing? I mean, that's for a lad like me, that's fascinating.
Yeah, no, of course, and I definitely get the interest there, and I think connecting the dots is really important. I feel like a lot of surveillance teams today are structured as alert factories, right? Their main mission is clearing alerts, and that's not really the mission of the function. The mission of the function is to detect specific underlying behaviors, and oftentimes it's not just one email, where you're bribing someone or colluding or manipulating markets in some way. It's a series of emails. It's me sending an email, and then we're texting, we're sending a WhatsApp message, and then I'm calling you. And so connecting the dots is really important. And there's been a few kind of advances in technologies that allow you to do that. One is the centralization of different data sources in a single platform. You don't need a separate platform for email, for monitoring audio, for monitoring social. You should be looking for a system that not only can centralize all those data sources on one platform, unify them to a single employee, right? Paul has a specific, employee identifier. He's got an email address. He's got a Slack username. And so the ability to link all of those together, so we know each of these communications is one person, and a person is at the heart of these specific behaviors. That's really important. The second piece is coded language. There's actually technology that can identify patterns in communications and identify when a specific word is used in the context of other words, so that you can understand the meaning behind it. So for example, if instead of the word fraud, I'm using the word balloon or something, the system will know that those words are used in similar contexts.
Like a code word, you mean? Almost,
yeah, exactly.
And so you can see through it almost.
Yeah, and so it's it's an imperfect science, and it's a lot easier to tell if there's a pattern of communications versus just like one email. But usually if there's a systematic behavior that's occurring over a series of emails, and it's occurring in language that, otherwise from the code word sounds, collusive in some way, or sounds fraudulent in some way, the system will still recognize it as a higher risk score.
I mean, obviously you've gone through in a great, very interesting details some of the technology challenges, but obviously technology is only part of the challenge, I would imagine. I mean, regarding getting access to the data, I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, you've got single platforms. You'll have telephones and voice and messaging all on, even Bloomberg on one platform. But if you wanted to go wider and to get data from social media channels and or even other firms, is that a legal issue or a regulatory issue, or are there easy ways to get access to that sort of data already?
There definitely are ways. So before talking about the legal or regulatory risks, there are definitely ways to capture pretty much every communication channel. There's connectors to LinkedIn and Facebook Workplace, and a variety of the social channels. There's even connectors now to encrypted channels. So WhatsApp and WeChat, things that years ago were very, very difficult to get through. And so there are mechanisms that it's possible to capture and then monitor those variety of channels. I think the question, should you monitor those? It's really dependent on your organization. Is business communication really happening in those channels? In certain geographies, there's a ton of communication in WeChat and WhatsApp, and that puts the burden on you to ensure that content is captured. And there's mechanisms to ensure that you're getting the appropriate employee consent, and there might be different requirements if it's not a centrally managed data source. but it's definitely possible, and there are firms that are monitoring all those channels for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the human side because I mean, you can probably tell by my accent, I'm from the UK, and I know you're from
Mm-hmm.
the United States. But in the UK, there's obviously often a sort of strange paradox. People don't like being monitored, but like the monitoring in place because it gives them some sort of comfort. I mean, you did mention obviously if people are having their communications monitored, you need to ensure it's in their employment or contracts and they're fully aware of it. Maybe do training and awareness and stuff like that. I mean, are there any other, from your experience of this, any other sort of social pushbacks on being monitored? I mean, I know it's a very paradoxical situation being monitored, isn't it? That people love it but hate it just as much. You know?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the industry that you're in. If you're
Yeah.
in financial and you're at a buy side or sell side firm, there's real risk in what you do every day, right?
Yeah.
There is real risks for you to manipulate markets. There's real risk for you to communicate with your customers in a way that is unfair or unethical. There's real risks for market abuse, and I think there is an expectation within within the financial industry that this is a regulatory requirement and aspect of the job that you're in. We're also starting to see surveillance in other high risk industries, like that are regulated, like pharmaceuticals or organizations where bribery is a big risk. And so it really depends on like the context of the industry that you're in and the expectation. We often find many of our customers do incorporate that into the employment agreement or the employee handbook to be very clear that this is a condition of your employment. We also do recommend that in your surveillance team, you're very thoughtful about balancing employee privacy with the actual risks themselves. And so you can put a lot of controls in place so you can minimize what you can actually see. And the goal here isn't to invade privacy or to understand what all of your employees are doing. The goal is to identify risk. And so how can you actually set the system up that way? Well, you can set up specific permissions so that maybe you can only see or most people on the team can only see alerts that are generated. You can have a variety of controls in place that audit all of the searching or viewing activities. So if someone is running an ad hoc search because they have the permission to do so, what are they searching for, and is there a justification behind that search? So there's a lot of controls you can put in place that balance the employee privacy with the underlying risks themselves, but it really is dependent on your business and the specific requirements based on the businesses that you have.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, as I sort of mentioned in my little preamble at the beginning, obviously this is everything's becoming more and more electronic, and maybe even driven by the fact that we're all working from home because of COVID-19, and there's a chance that we'll never all go back to the offices. What do you sort of see the future trends of this surveillance and communication overview over, say, the next 5 years? I mean, it'd be interesting your views on that.
Yeah. I would say that there's a few kind of trends that we see. I would say the first is we're operating in the time of COVID-19, and that's caused a lot more remote work. It's also caused a shift in the communication channels that are actually being communicated on. So rise in Zoom and video collaboration. And so that puts a big emphasis on this industry to be able to capture that communication effectively, which we can, and then sift through it, right? Audio communication is growing in need because so much of our collaboration is happening in that channel. So shift in data sources, expanding beyond traditional email and chat data sources. We're also seeing a massive shift in rise in the adoption of AI tools and machine learning. This industry started out where only the largest banks could afford the advanced technologies like machine learning. Today, it's available to the masses. It's much more affordable. It's easy enough to be used by a much smaller firm. And so we're seeing a significant adoption in those technologies. I think we're also seeing the expansion of communication surveillance beyond English or the traditional, native language that the business operates in. I think many firms, they have lexicons built out for English and hope they catch everything else, and that's not really acceptable in today's day and age. And so there's machine translation technologies, there's machine language detection technologies. So an email is sent, it will automatically say, is this English or French or Russian? And you can do different things depending on the different languages. And so the technology has come a long way, and it makes a surveillance officer's jobs a lot easier to broaden the coverage of the variety of risks and communication types within their organization.
That's brilliant. Unfortunately, we're almost at the end of our time slot, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to bring this to a close. I'd like to thank you personally, Jordan. It was an enlightening 20-odd minutes. I must say I'm far more knowledgeable about it than I was, 21 minutes ago. So obviously from a personal note and also from a TSAM note, I'd like to thank you for for spending your time with us. And I wish all the viewers you found as useful as I did. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks.